I think it's very important for us to understand with what we are dealing with and whether we are facing a possibility that we are entering the Third World War. Now, Europe had, of course, two major wars, the First World War and the Second World War. Both of them, brought the destruction to Europe. Is the Russian-Ukrainian war is a local war, or this is the beginning of a Third World War? And I think this is a question which we ask ourselves, and I think for this we need to understand what's happening in Russia, who is ruling Russia, who is in charge of Russia, and what those people who are in charge of Russia actually want, and what the plan is, what's going on in their heads. When the war started, and it started probably in 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, everybody was hoping that Putin has in his mind a very limited plan of taking Crimea from Ukraine and unifying it with the Russian Federation. It's not that the West was happy about this, but what we heard from many European leaders and American leaders, that Putin should announce that this is the end of his foreign policy ambitions, and that the world would try to accommodate this particular annexation. Indeed, not only Putin started invasion of Ukraine from the east in April of 2014, but he also made a major speech in Moscow saying that Russia starts to reshape the borders of Europe, made after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. He also stated that the collapse of the Soviet Union is his major personal tragedy and a geopolitical catastrophe of Russia. And this was the day when Putin, declared openly about his plans for the future. But this was not the first time when Russia actually invaded a foreign country and used forces outside the borders of the Russian Federation. Well, there were two Chechen wars, of course, but this was a kind of internal wars within the Russian Federation. But in August of 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. We have to acknowledge that nothing happened. No one actually noticed this invasion. Georgia, of course, was a small country, kind of outside European affairs. The war was very short. Not too many people was killed, and everybody just missed this war as if it never happened. This was probably a mistake. Historians are not allowed to use the word if, but looking back, we probably should accept the fact that if Europe would react to this war the way it reacted in the war of 2022, nothing else would happen. Indeed, Putin was unpunished. Russia was unpunished for this invasion. And then we've seen the next, of course, level of this invasion, of this aggression in 2014 against Ukraine. Who was to blame for that invasion, and who was to blame for the reaction which was not strong enough when that invasion happened. This is a complicated question because everybody, when invasion of 2014 happened, was avoiding to use the word war. Everyone was so afraid to think that the war is really coming into Europe again, that Ukrainians were not using the word war in relation to the, situation and, things which were happening with Ukraine. For example, Ukrainians never broke diplomatic relations with Russia over the invasion of 2014. The trade between Ukraine and Russia continued for all these years until actually February of 22. For this reason, Europe did not use the word war as well. And although we've seen some limited sanctions against Russia, those sanctions were not strong enough. And again, for Putin, this was an indication that the West is very weak, that the West is not ready for confrontation with Russia, and that he should continue, with his plan to recreate the Soviet Union. But at that time, those plans were announced in this, black and white format to recreate the Soviet Union. And under recreation of the Soviet Union, Putin meant, first of all, Ukraine and Belarus, but also the Baltic states. Now, the Baltic states, of course, were members of NATO by that time. And it was obvious that it's not so simple to invade the Baltic states for political reasons. So that's why Ukraine was number one on his list, and Belarus was number two. It is also very important to understand that you actually could not take Ukraine unless you control Belarus first. And that's why in 2014, Putin's plan worked only partially. He was able to take Crimea, of course. He was able to start the military conflict, a kind of war in the eastern part of Ukraine in Donbass. But he was not able to attack Kiev because it's impossible to attack Kiev from the territory of the Russian Federation. You may attack Kiev only from Belarus. So for this, you have to take Belarus first. And actually, in the book which we published in 2015, we paid special attention to Belarus, saying that we should watch what would happen with Belarus. And if we see annexation of Belarus, or if we see Russians taking control of Belarus, this would be an indication for us that the next step will be the occupation of Ukraine. I have to say that we missed completely and entirely occupation of Belarus by Russia. It happened in 2020-2021, prior to the invasion of Ukraine, of course. We might miss it because of our problems with coronavirus, but the result is that we completely miss the opportunity to watch Lukashenko, to deal with Lukashenko as dictator in Belarus, to help Belarusian people to deal with Lukashenko. And by doing this, we actually allowed Putin to take control over Belarus. So in 2020, Lukashenko lost election in Belarus. And this was so obvious to everybody because the entire country went to protest. These protests were suppressed by Lukashenko with the help of Russian police forces, which was sent to Belarus. And after this, of course, Lukashenko was, considered to Putin to be a kind of puppet dictator of Belarus whom he could control. There were several agreements signed between Russia and Belarus which allowed Russian troops to enter Belarus. We missed this part as well. No one yelled that it's becoming dangerous. No one yelled that, the Belarus strategically is very important territory because this opens the borders of Eastern European states to the Russian army. And then, of course, when Russian troops just settled in Belarus and it became obvious that they represent danger to Ukraine, no one was thinking about invasion still. Even when Putin concentrated troops along the Belarusian and Russian borders, preparing the army for invasion, everybody was hoping that this is a bluff, that Putin is trying to take down the government of Zelensky, but he's not ready to start a full-scale war. Now, was Putin bluffing? We know now that he was not, because he invaded Ukraine. But the bluff portion still actually exists. You see, the idea was that Zelensky and Ukraine will capitulate to avoid the war. Because to have the war is very dangerous and irrational, and people are going to be killed. And for a European country like Ukraine, which is much weaker than the Russian Federation, to have a war against Russia is a very dramatic decision to be made. And we know that just before the war started, the night of the war, of the last night of peace, President Lukashenko, on behalf of Putin, called Vladimir Zelensky and offered him to capitulate and to surrender Ukraine to the Russian Federation, with a promise not to start the war. And Zelensky refused. And I actually think that this was the day when Ukraine won the war against Russia. Now, I will explain what I mean when I say won the war, because the war is not over and maybe very far away from being over. Nevertheless, everybody was expecting, not just Putin, but major politicians and major military leaders of the world, that Ukraine would be taken by Russia very quickly, that within a week or a month, Russians will take Kiev, will reinstall former President Yanukovych, a pro-Russian president who lost his power after revolution of 2014, after Maidan revolution in Kiev, and that the war might be over in probably 1 month. The idea was that after this, Putin immediately would move his troops to Transnistria. Transnistria is a district in Moldova where a Russian ethnic population lives. There are approximately 2020 Russian passports which were issued by that day to citizens of Transnistria, of Moldova. And there are already Russian troops there. They're in Moldova. And Putin was hoping very quickly to take control over Moldova, and then using the troops of Ukraine, first of all, Belarus, and even Moldova, to strike against the Baltic states. This was the plan. I really do not know how quickly Putin was planning to proceed to the Baltic states with his conventional army. And the understanding was that the West has no equally strong conventional forces in Europe, and probably no one would risk the nuclear war. And, this dream which Putin had, the recreation of the Soviet Union and the recreation of influence which the Soviet Union had over Eastern Europe, would become reality, would come true in like 4-6 months period. And this plan did not work. And it did not work because Ukrainians started to fight. And as we know, quite successfully. And after 8 months of war, it's a little bit longer than 8 months now, Putin has no army. This army was destroyed by Ukrainians. Putin is not able to collect the new army because when he announced the mobilization of the army on 21st of September, and he wanted to collect, to draft 300,000 people, those 300,000 people, potential recruits, simply left Russia abroad. He is now trying to collect another 300,000 people. Russia, of course, is a huge country, we know this, with unlimited supply of young men who might be drafted. But this army is not capable to fight because it's not ready to fight, because no one trains them. Putin just gave press conference at Valdai conference, which he usually has once a year, and he openly said to journalists, which were, who were very shocked by this, that the Russian troops are prepared for like several days before they put into fighting. So this army cannot win the battle against Ukraine. The question is Ukrainians are really winning the war? Because it seems to be that they're winning, but at the same time they are not able to force Russian troops out of Ukraine. And there is an answer to this question, why Ukrainians are winning the war, but at the same time it seems to be that they are not able actually to win it. Now, they're not able to win it because the West is helping Ukraine, no questions, sending weapons, sending money, accepting refugees, and this is a great help without which Ukraine would not be able to hold. But at the same time, the West hopes to avoid a major confrontation. In other words, the European Union, NATO, the United States, everybody is sincerely hoping that this war will stay within Ukrainian borders, that Ukraine should be strong enough to hold Russia, but that Russia should not be provoked to use nuclear weapons. And this is a very understandable position, because the difference between the Second World War and this war, which we are facing now, is the ability of the Russian Federation to use nuclear weapons. If it comes, if the pressure would come against Russia or against Putin, or if the Russian army is about to be collapsed, or if Russia is about to lose the war, they may choose to use nuclear weapons. And this is a very important question. Probably by now this is the most important question, because if it's not for nuclear weapons, we would not worry about this war as well. I mean, again, it's tragic that Ukrainians are killed. It's terrible for Ukraine. Ukrainians are losing people every day. But from the point of view of security of Europe and NATO and the United States, if Ukrainians are holding Russians, this is basically, a good result. And if Ukrainians are holding Russians for a long time, then Russia could collapse the way the Soviet Union collapsed as a result of Soviet-Afghan war, which was continuing for approximately 10 years. Now, the problem is that I think this is not what's going to happen. The problem is that Putin, of course, lost his army, and he might lose another one, but he really doesn't care how many people are killed. This is not a problem for Russia at all. The life in Russia is very cheap. The society is under control. People have no vote in what's happening. They have no elections. They have no freedom of press. There is no political opposition in Russia. So basically, Putin could do what he wants, and he is ready to send more and more troops into this battle, which he is not able to win with conventional weapons, because his idea is that the fact that Russia has nuclear weapons and is blackmailing the West that it would use it sooner or later unless Ukraine is given to Russia, that this blackmail will bring the results. So that's what we are facing actually now, that Putin is blackmailing the West with this, his ability to use nuclear weapons, with the hope that the West would stop to support the Ukraine, and Ukraine would not be able to continue this fight against the Russian Federation. The question is what to do. I mean, do we continue to defend Ukraine by all means, or we stop helping Ukraine and basically, surrendering it to Putin with the hope that this will end the conflict? I think in order to answer this question, first we need to understand who is really Putin and who is really ruling the country. And we know that in 2014, as well as in 2022, the decision to invade was made by 5 people. One was Putin, of course, who is the president. The second person was Nikolai Patrushev, who is former director of the FSB and now, is in charge of Security Council of the Russian Federation. The third person was current director of the FSB, Bortnikov. The fourth person was Minister of the Defense, Shoigu, and the fifth person was the chairman, the head of the General Staff of the Russian Army. In other words, out of 5 people who were making this decision, 3 were from the FSB. This was not a decision taken by the Russian government. This was not a decision taken by the Russian parliament. This was not, of course, a decision taken by any other, institution in Russia. This was a purely FSB and military decision. And the problem with this is that that's to whom power in Russia belongs. This is not Putin as a dictator, because if Putin would be a dictator, then we might take dictator somehow down, or something might happen to him, or he might die tomorrow, or somebody might kill him tomorrow, and then the conflict might be over. Unfortunately, this is not the case. In Russia, we are dealing with the FSB as an institution, which controls Russia. Now, I have to say that this is the first time in world's history when the state security rules the country. So usually we would deal with monarchs or tyrants or dictators or political parties which would rule the country. But in case of Russia, we are dealing with the state security which runs this country and which also controls the army, what is very important because usually in many other cases, army would have a kind of independent position between among the institutions which, rule a country or run the country. And for this reason, we have to accept the fact that the problem is not Putin alone. The problem is much more complicated because we are dealing with a group of people and a major institution. This institution was created in December of 1917. This is the oldest institution in Russia now. It's more than 100 years old. This is the only institution which survived the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now they're in power in Russia. And they took this power with a goal, with a particular goal which they had, to confront the West and to fight the West and to destabilize the West. And that's why this war is not about a part of Ukraine or entire Ukraine. This war is not even about an attempt to recreate the Soviet Union. This war is about the destruction of the West as the institution which is, in Putin's opinion, competing against the Russian Federation. And that's why this war, unfortunately, would not be able to be stopped unless Russia is defeated. Now, it is very difficult to defeat a country which is a major one in Europe, especially when this country has nuclear weapons again. So we have to think what the options are and how to deal with this major problem. And I believe also the situation is, seems to be very dramatic. I think there is a way to deal with this problem. First of all, Ukrainians are doing actually much better than everybody expected. And now Ukraine has a major army in Europe which is able to hold against the Russian aggression. Ukrainians are getting help, but the problem is that they're getting help under certain conditions. The conditions which Ukrainians are obliged to fulfill is the following. They are not getting weapons which would allow them to advance against the Russian army. This is weapons which allows them to halt against the Russian army, but not to advance. And the main point is that they are not using weapons which they received from the West to fire against their enemies in Belarus and in the Russian Federation. And if you look at this condition from the point of view of strategy of war, then Ukrainians are put in a position when they are not able to win the war. Because you cannot win the war if you are not allowed to fire into enemy's territory. And of course, Russians and Belarusians Russian troops are concentrated in Belarus and in Russia along the Russian-Ukrainian border. And if Ukrainians are not able to strike them preventively, then of course Russians successfully attacking them every time they regroup. So I think until the West will change this position and would change strategy from defensive one to offensive one, and would allow Ukrainians to have free hands in dealing with Russians, the West put itself in a very weak position when Russia is actually provoked to use nuclear weapons. Because if this war continues for a long time, then Putin eventually will come to this idea to use nuclear weapons because he has nothing else to fight with, right? Because they're out of people, they're out of weapons, they're probably out of time. Although I do not think that this war will end quickly. Some people are hoping that this would end by the end of the year or by next spring. I do not really think so. But at the same time, I do not think that Putin has luxury to have this war for several years, the luxury which Soviet Union, for example, had with Afghanistan. So my point is, I guess, that we have chances to avoid nuclear confrontation if we help Ukrainians to win this war in Ukraine. Because if we will not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will proceed further. And at one point, we will face this nuclear ultimatum with which we would have to deal with. And this ultimatum will start as the war of February of 2022. It would start with a bluff, what we think would be a bluff. But then, if the bluff is not, accepted, if blackmail would not work, then Putin, of course, would have to make a decision whether to use nuclear weapons or not. Now, these nuclear weapons probably will not be used from the territory of the Russian Federation, because then retaliation will go against Kremlin. I think this is the reason why Putin again keeps Belarus independent, with all his love for annexation of territories. And we see that every time he takes control over territory, he tries to annex it, to declare the territory to be part of the Russian Federation. In case of Belarus, although he controls Belarus, we do not see any attempt to include Belarus into Russian Federation or to annex it. And I think the reason this is not done is precisely that particular reason, that Putin plans to strike with nuclear weapons against, first of all, Ukraine, but maybe even Eastern Europe, from a territory of Belarus. Because then retaliation would go against Belarus and not against the Russian Federation. And since we missed the occupation of Belarus, which went quietly in 2020, 2021, when Belarus became platform for the Russian advance into Ukraine in the direction of Kiev, I would say that it's extremely important not to miss the danger of Belarus being under Russian control today, because I think Putin again would try to use Belarus for the nuclear strike against the West or against Eastern Europe only, or even against the Ukraine. Now, nuclear weapons could not be transferred secretly. This is impossible in today's world. But unfortunately, nuclear weapons could be transferred very quickly. And if nuclear weapons are moved into Belarus, this might be too late to retaliate. Because, again, we might be out of time in this case, and Europe might face a major risk of nuclear strike from Belarusian territory. And I'm afraid the only way to avoid this risk of this nuclear confrontation is to deal with this problem on preventive level. And it's very difficult, of course, to argue that we have to deal with Belarus preventively, but I'm afraid that that's what have to be done if we want to avoid the nuclear confrontation. Because once again, I do not think that Putin would strike from the territory of Russian Federation, because this would invite retaliation, and this might be suicidal for Putin as well. In order to deal with Belarus, we need again to give Ukrainian army free hands in dealing with aggressor. And aggressor is now coming from two countries, of course, the Russian Federation and Belarus. And since to deal with Russia is difficult, it's a major power, but to deal with Belarus is not. The regime of Lukashenko is very weak. He is not popular at all. Belarusian army actually now is fighting. There is a major unit in Ukraine which is fighting against the Russian army. So there is even an army, a Belarusian army in Ukraine now, which is ready to fight to free Belarus. There is a government, Belarusian government in exile, which is actually formed. There are a lot of major political opponents of Lukashenko in Belarusian prisons. So, generally speaking, the Belarus might be taken out of Putin's control very quickly with the help of Ukrainian army. The counter-argument, of course, is that in this case, Putin would declare Belarus to be part of the Russian Federation and would annex Belarus. And this might happen, although in this case Putin would lose the ability to strike against Europe from an independent Belarusian territory. So we may not succeed in freeing Belarus and getting Belarus out of Lukashenko's control or Putin's control, but we will succeed in avoiding the risk of nuclear strike from Belarus, what I think is the major problem now, because once again, at this point, after 8 months of war, Putin has no conventional army. The only option he has is to use or not to use a nuclear weapon. And if Putin is not able to use nuclear weapon anymore, and I think again he will not use it from the territory of Russian Federation, he will lose the war. I mean, he will lose the war openly in the eyes of Russians, even though many Russians support him and support this war in Ukraine, but they do not want to lose this war. And this is our only chance to defeat Russia and to stop the war, which otherwise would be written in history as the Third World War, which was started on 24th of February 22. Now, this will be written as the Third World War in the next textbooks, which will be written sooner or later by historians. And the question is still how long this war will continue and what the developments are going to be, and whether nuclear weapons are going to be used or not, and how much we all pay for the collapse of the Russian Federation. The collapse will take place. We just do not know at this point again, what the price for this collapse is going to be. But I have to note that what Putin have done to Russia is the complete destruction of this country. I mean, no enemy could could damage Russia as much as Putin did. And sooner or later, I think Russians would understand this, and sooner or later, Russians probably would start to create a different country. But for this, Russians have to accept the defeat of this empire, which already collapsed once in 1991, and forget about the idea to have an empire and to control other nations and other countries. So I think there is still a hope, and this hope is brought to us by Ukrainians. But in order to win this war, we have to help Ukrainians, and we have to give them free hands to deal with the aggression.